Jeep's day of reckoning is finally here. All right, in all seriousness, we are here in a very moody setting in my garage talking 3 reasons why Jeep is struggling right now and why I don't expect that's going to change anytime soon. Now, Jeep has been in the news quite a bit over the last few weeks, surprisingly, and so I want to break down some of the stuff that's been going on, and then we'll dive into the topic of today's video because they're all interrelated. Now, one of the announcements was that the head of Jeep North America has been replaced after only being in the role for about 9 months. Now, my understanding is that individual has actually moved to another position within the Stellantis brand, but it still doesn't look that great after only being in the role for about 9 months. Now, the new head of Jeep North America is coming from Ram, and we'll see what that means because Ram's not doing that great either. But in any case, there's a new head of Jeep North America. The other news is more impactful for you and I out there and us consumers because it impacts the vehicles we own. So there was an NHTSA investigation recently announced into Jeep vehicle fires, specifically for the Wrangler and Gladiator, and they're investigating over 780,000 vehicles to determine what the causes of this fire. I believe there's been about 9 cases so far of vehicles spontaneously combusting, and they're not really sure what happened. There was one instance where a vehicle was off for about 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden it combusted. Now, thankfully it was outside, but that doesn't really help the case. So I'm curious to see what unfolds with that. I also saw somewhere else that there is currently a recall for Jeep Wrangler and Gladiators that have the smaller instrument gauge cluster display because it can become faulty or something will go wrong where it doesn't alert the individual of certain things that are going on with the car, and that's actually against certain regulations. So they're recalling upwards of 30,000+ vehicles to get that fixed. It's a much smaller investigation than the NHTSA fire, but it is still something going on in the news. And then the other news that's more related to today's topic is the fact that just a couple weeks ago, Jeep halted production of the Grand Cherokee and the Wrangler models at its production facilities for a couple days. They had to shut them down because there was just too much inventory on dealership lots. And that brings me to today's topic, which is what exactly is going on at Jeep. In the past, Jeep has always been the stellar brand for FCA and Stellantis. Dodge was always kind of a more boutique brand that served muscle car enthusiasts and people who needed 3-row crossovers. Chrysler, as of today, just sits with one specific model, being the Pacifica. But Jeep was always the American brand, the one that was the most profitable for the company, and the one that seemed to just print money for Stellantis and FCA before the merger. But here we sit in August of 2024, and it seems as if the tables have kind of turned on Jeep, and it's no longer the big cash cow that it used to be. Now, don't get me wrong, it still accounts for a substantial amount of sales for the whole Stellantis brand, but things aren't looking as bright for the future of Jeep as they were just a few years ago. Now, I wanted to bring up the Motor Trend article that recently went live a couple days ago. It actually spurred my idea for this video, and that was that the Ford Mustang sales are up, no surprise because there's not much competition, and Jeep Wrangler sales are down. They quoted that it was 17% down for the Wrangler specifically and 19% overall for the Jeep brand. I also looked at Cox Automotive reports. Cox Automotive is a very reliable source in the automotive industry. They actually make a lot of the software that dealerships use, but they also specialize in research for the automotive industry. And last month's article from Cox Automotive pointed out that July inventory for Jeep was some of the worst in the entire automotive industry. It was definitely at the very highest end, followed by Dodge, Jaguar, Ram, and Lincoln, which isn't really a compliment. According to Cox Automotive, there were 129 days of supply of Jeeps, where the national average for the entire automotive industry here in the United States is 68 days. So we're almost doubling the amount of days of supply of Jeep products on dealership lots. And that is part of the reason why they decided to cut production for a few days at their plants. Now, I wanted to verify some of these figures, so I went onto Stellantis' website and I pulled up their sales figures from January to June of 2024 and that comparison to prior year. And according to Stellantis' own reporting, Jeep Wrangler sales were down 17% in the second quarter of the year when you compare it to the prior year. And then year to date, so from January to June of 2024, they were down 9% as compared to last year. I also did a deep dive into good goodcarbadcar.net. They do a lot of the monthly sales figures for manufacturers, and their numbers lined up exactly to what Stellantis has reported. And based on the monthly sales figures, it looks like Jeep peaked in terms of sales back in 2021. So it's been going on 3 consecutive years of sales declines year over year. Back in 2021, they had over 200,000 units sold of the Jeep Wrangler, and as of 2023, they were just around 150,000. That is a significant year-over-year decline. And in 2024, as we know, based on the January to June figures, they're down even worse than 2023 results. So it's only getting worse for Jeep. And let's dive into the topic as to the 3 reasons why that is. Now, the first reason is a very significant one, and it's kind of obvious: pricing. So first off, the environment we're sitting in today, where interest rates are very high, at record highs, or at least over the last several decades, and inflation has continuously crept up and ate into our pocketbooks, consumers are hesitant to spend a lot of money on cars. And I see this firsthand in the videos I review and post on my YouTube channel. Generally speaking, the more affordable vehicles are viewed more because that's what people can afford. But you're also seeing that in terms of car sales. Sales of vehicles have definitely started to slow down a little bit, especially from the peak in 2020 and 2021. People just aren't necessarily buying as many new cars, or they're looking for strong incentives. And that's part of the reason why Ford and GM and others are offering extremely low interest rate loans on some of these vehicles because they need to move the inventory. So all of that aside, pricing is a very significant factor in people's buying decisions. And the Jeep Wrangler is not an affordable vehicle by any stretch of the imagination, especially when you look at the features that it comes with. Now, to prove this point, I did a little search on Jeep's website. They actually have a very robust website, so does Ram and Dodge, where you can see inventory all across the United States. You can sort it, you can look at specific packages, and I did that. I went on and looked at a 250-mile radius of where I live here in Utah to determine what is the average pricing of these vehicles. And I have the numbers for you. So, out of the 316 Jeep Wranglers in my 250-mile radius, only 18 of them, that's 5.7%, were less than the average price of a new car, that being just around $48,000. Try to wrap your head around that. Only 18 vehicles out of 316 are below average price. That's crazy, especially when you consider the base entry-level Jeep Wrangler, the Sport. It comes with manual windows, a small gauge cluster. Now, luckily for 2024, they updated the screen, so they all come with a 12.3-inch touchscreen, but there's no heated seats, there's no bells and whistles. It's a bare bones vehicle. That also includes the 2 and the 4-door trim levels. So to get that price point, about half of those were 2-door models, which isn't necessarily what everybody who's going to go out and buy a new car is looking to purchase. It's a very specific subset of individuals that would pick the 2-door version. So I decided to dive a little bit deeper and figure out how many of each trim level are out there, because that will give me a good indication of price. Well, I looked at the Sport S, there's the Willys, the Sahara, the Rubicon X, the Rubicon 392, and then the Rubicon 392 Final Edition. There's so many trim levels of the Wrangler. And of all those trim levels, the 3 most popular, or I should say the 3 that had the most amount of supply sitting on dealership lots, in 3rd place was the Sahara trim level, which is a pretty expensive vehicle. Now, according to Jeep's website, the Sahara trim level starts at $50,000 for the 4-door version. But realistically, you're never going to find a $50,000 Sahara trim level on dealership lots. More than likely, they're going to be at least $55,000 to $60,000. And this is not even including the 4xe trim level, mind you. This is strictly the internal combustion version of the Jeep Wrangler. So already you're anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 to $15,000 more expensive than the national average price of a new car. Now, in 2nd place of the trim level with the most amount of supply on dealership lots was a little bit of a better story. It's the Sport S trim level. Now, again, according to Jeep, this trim level starts around $41,000 on Jeep's website. But again, you're not going to find one for 41 grand. And the fact is that there's only 18 below $48,000, so the majority of these Sport S's are also above the national average. And then in the number 1 spot of the trim level with the most amount of supply is, no surprise, the Jeep Wrangler Rubicon. It held the first place with 36.4% of total inventory. I should mention the Sport S was 21.5%, and then in third place, the Sahara was 15.8%. So the Rubicon has more than double the amount of Saharas sitting on dealership lots. And the Rubicon is a great trim level. It's fantastic, extremely off-road capable. But its starting price is also very incredible. Now, according to Jeep's website, the starting price of a Rubicon 4-door is $52,000, but let's be real here. There is no Rubicon out there for $52,000. A lot of them are in the mid to high $50,000 range, some of them in the low $60,000 range, because you add a few extra options and bada bim, bada boom, you're sitting at a very expensive vehicle. You're starting to hit a price point that's about $15,000 or more expensive than the average price of a new car. There's your answer. That's why they're not selling. And again, these vehicles are not the best daily drivers. I know because I owned a Ford Bronco and I reviewed a couple different Jeep Wranglers on my channel, and they're not the most practical. Typically, Jeep Wranglers are for either people in Utah to daily drive, or for other people out there, they're kind of toy cars. They're second vehicles that you take out off-roading or you take to the beach or you enjoy, but it's not the most practical daily driver, especially if you have a family. There are plenty more vehicles out there that are more affordable, that come with more features and are a lot more daily drivable. Are they as fun? It's questionable, probably not. However, fun isn't necessarily the rationale for a buying decision when you have a family and you have obligations. The Wrangler is loud, it doesn't drive very well, and people are getting kind of fed up paying $60,000+ for an off-roader. Now, I've seen videos out there talking about how Jeep has had skyrocketing prices over the last few years, but I don't think a lot of them address the specific nuance as to why prices have increased, or I should say how prices have increased for the Jeep Wranglers. Because if you actually look at like a 2018 model year Jeep Wrangler, starting price for the Sport S was like $30,000. And you compare it to the starting price of a Jeep Wrangler Sport S as of 2024, which is like $32,000, they really haven't increased prices as much. In fact, I went through every single trim level and I compared prices from 2018 to 2024, accounting for inflation, which again has been kind of crazy over the last 3 or 4 years. And the prices of Jeep Wranglers today are actually less expensive on their base MSRP than they were back in 2018. But this is where it gets a little bit interesting. Now, the packages that they now offer on these vehicles have increased tremendously over that same period. For example, back in 2018, you could upgrade to an automatic transmission for a premium of $2,000. Today, if you want to get an automatic transmission on any single trim level of the Jeep Wrangler, you have to pay a whopping $4,500. That's more than double the price of what it was back in 2018. If you look at the technology group, which back in the day didn't really include much, but it was about a $1,000 option. Today, it's about a $2,300 option. Now, granted, the technology package nowadays includes more features because the cars are more technologically advanced. However, I would argue that technology generally becomes more affordable over time, so even though they offered less back in 2018, the price shouldn't change that much because this technology is used in a lot of different vehicles. The Jeep Wrangler doesn't have any type of pioneering technology. It's stuff that you can get in pretty much any car, including an entry-level Toyota Corolla. And of course, now they offer certain safety groups and blind spot monitoring, yada, 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 and that all adds up to a very much higher purchase price for a Jeep Wrangler today than it was back then, because the vehicles sitting on dealer lots already come with those packages from the factory. So it's very hard to find an affordable base trim level version of the Wrangler. Now, this rings true for pretty much every manufacturer out there. It's very hard to find the base trim level. However, with Jeep, it's a little bit more noticeable because people are not used to paying $60,000+ for a Wrangler, no matter how many features and packages it comes with. People like those features. They're great, very welcome, but they're not necessarily what Jeep Wrangler owners really want or need for that matter. Now, the second reason why Jeep is struggling right now is plain and simple increased competition. Back in 2021, when Jeep moved over 200,000 units, there really wasn't much competition. I mean, you had a lot of luxury vehicles that were competing with it, but nobody was cross-shopping a Wrangler with a G-Wagon. The Defender was just coming out in 2020, but still not really a competitor. But there is one vehicle that comes to mind that just happened to come out late 2021, early 2022. Yeah, you guessed it, the Ford Bronco. Correlation is not always causation, so just because sales decline doesn't mean it's because of the Bronco, but I think we can make an educated guess that the Bronco definitely ate into some of the Jeep Wrangler sales. I would argue a very significant amount of sales. Broncos were selling like hotcakes. Even today, they're still selling pretty well, and I think a lot of the decline in Jeep sales over the years is pricing and increased competition from the Ford Bronco. And it's only getting worse for the Wrangler, that is. Because as of today, you can also go out and buy a Toyota Land Cruiser, which is in the $55,000, $60,000 range. Not significantly higher than any Jeep Wrangler out there, but the Land Cruiser is extremely capable off-road, but it's more daily drivable. You also have the new 4Runner coming out next year. Looks really good, also extremely capable. In fact, even old 4Runners were selling really well. And I would argue that there's a lot more competition from the pickup truck space that there maybe wasn't just a few years ago. The new Chevy Colorado ZR2, there's the GMC Canyon AT4, you have the new updated Ford Ranger and Ford Ranger Raptor. And then I would say one of the biggest competitors from the pickup truck space would be the newly redesigned Toyota Tacoma. In fact, I heard a study out there that upwards of 40% of Toyota Tacoma owners take their vehicles off-road. And so with the new refresh of a pretty attractive looking vehicle, I would argue there's not going to be very many people that are going from the prior gen Toyota Tacoma to a Jeep Wrangler. They're probably going to upgrade to the new one despite the concerns around the turbocharged engine. And the competition isn't just coming from off-road vehicles, it's also coming from off-road trims of regular day-to-day cars. I mean, a lot of manufacturers are doubling down on these off-road trims that don't really mean the car can go off-road. What I mean by that is Honda has the Trail Sport, which has a little bit of extra cladding and more beefier looking tires, and you know, it's an off-road trim level. Hyundai has the XRT, Kia has the X Pro, Toyota has the Adventure trim level on the RAV4. There's just so many different off-road looking vehicles out there because it's currently the fad. And you no longer have to compromise by having a terrible ride in a loud cabin just to have an off-road looking vehicle. You can accomplish that in a lot of different ways nowadays. Now, the third reason why I think the Jeep Wrangler is struggling and will continue to struggle is I just don't think the 2024 facelift was significant enough. Now, don't get me wrong, I reviewed a Jeep Wrangler Rubicon 392 last year and I loved it. It sounded great, it was quick, it looked good, and personally, I like the facelift, specifically on the interior. I love that they put in a 12.3-inch infotainment screen. It finally runs the latest software, and in some aspects, the infotainment is better than the Broncos. And I would argue that because Jeep now puts a 12.3-inch screen in all of their Wranglers, Bronco got rid of its smaller 8-inch screen from all of its models for 2025. So they're clearly competing against each other, and it's making it better for the consumer. But when it comes to the facelift, they really didn't do much at all from the outside. In fact, me being a car person who can usually very easily tell the difference between a prior generation, new generation, facelift, etc., I can't tell the difference. Unless I get right up to the grill and I see that in between the grill slots, they now have vents instead of pieces of painted plastic, I really would not be able to tell you whether it's a 2024 or a 2023 model year. And I think the majority of consumers see it that same way. In fact, I don't think the majority of consumers even know that the 2024 model year was a facelift because you really can't tell from the outside. Part of the reason people buy these cars is to look cool. And when you're sitting in a 2024 Wrangler that looks exactly the same as a 2019 Wrangler, you know, it's gonna be kind of hard to justify buying a new one when you can just go buy a used one instead. Bronco is a little bit of a different story. The used car prices are still pretty high. You might be able to get a good deal on a new one, and they look pretty cool. They're the hot new thing on the block, and so you wanna be sitting in a Bronco or a Land Cruiser instead of a Wrangler that looks pretty much the same. And so for that reason, I think people are going towards the used market, which is of course impacting new vehicle sales because there's no real reason to upgrade to the 2024 model year aside from just having a slightly bigger touchscreen and power seats, but those are both things that not necessarily Jeep owners really care that much about. So there you have it, folks. That was 3 reasons why the Jeep Wrangler is struggling. Now, the reason I say this isn't going to be solved overnight is because, well, it's not an easy solution. Either Jeep has to significantly redesign the Wrangler to make it stand out from the crowd, maybe make it a little bit more comfortable like the Bronco, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. The 2024 model year was just refreshed, so it's going to be at least 2 or 3 more years before they release a next generation. Also, in terms of competition, it's only going to continue. It's not going to get any better for Jeep. The only thing they really can do is start cutting prices significantly, and then maybe the market will start to realize that, hey, I can go get a Bronco or a Wrangler for $5,000 to $10,000 less with the same amount of features. And that is when you might start moving inventory. But at the same time, when Stellantis is currently struggling in terms of profitability, they didn't really show great numbers for the first half of 2024, it's going to be hard for them to make that decision to cut prices and eat more into their profitability. And that's going to definitely upset investors. So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Either you suffer on the top line or you suffer on the bottom line. I do wish Jeep makes it out of this. I think they make some really fantastic vehicles. The fact that they put a 392 Hemi inside of a Wrangler is fantastic. Their Grand Cherokee models look very attractive. They have some really nice technology. I think they're doing things right, but I think they're pricing themselves a little bit too high. I still don't understand how a Wagoneer could be over $100,000 and it still has that Jeep badge up front. It's just, there's a disconnect between the brand and the pricing. I think if Jeep releases some more affordable models, redesigns the Wrangler a little bit, and prices it a little bit lower, I think they'd be doing well off. But that's much easier said than done, and it's gonna take a few years. So what are your thoughts on Jeep and the Wrangler specifically? Do you see it surviving for another 10, 15 years? Or do you think Stellantis is gonna come in and start cutting things up and making some changes and possibly alienating Wrangler fans? Let me know down in the comments below. If you guys enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for all of the weekly car videos. Also check me out on all social media at Schwazy_. Until next time, everybody, I hope you stay Schwazy, stay healthy, have a wonderful day.